Hello, and welcome to what I'm calling the Idiot Philosophers podcast. Now, it's kind of a podcast, but I'm not putting it on Apple Podcasts or anything like that. It's just so I have the ability to have longer form conversations with you that I think are just too complicated to put into 2 or 3 or 5 minute videos. And today I want to talk about populism. Now, populism is such a big topic at the moment simply because that seems to be where our political parties are headed. So obviously we have Reform and Nigel Farage who are giving populist ideas, and obviously then you have the Green Party who are now starting to give very populist ideas as well. And the Green Party and Zach Polanski seem to be more of a symptom of Farage rather than the antidote, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But this basically is just an opportunity for me to just chat through where I think the country's politics is going, why it's so problematic, and why, as much as I think Rachel Reeves is not a particularly talented economist, why I do actually think that Labour currently are the best of a bad situation. The problem is the best of a bad situation is currently bankrupting the country, but it's nothing compared to what I think that either the Green Party or the Reform Party would actually do. So what I've got in front of me, I've got 2 articles who are both written by different people. So you've got one that's written by the BBC, which is on the Green Party and Zach Polanski, and then you've got the Tax Journal, and you've got a policy, and you've got a story written about the Reform Party. Now I'm just going to kind of go through some of the most extreme elements that I'm finding of this, and also I want to explain that populism really is a simple answer to a complex question. And we're kind of in a situation at the moment where there are a lot of very complicated questions. There are problems in this country that go back decades, and they're kind of all accumulating and kind of coming together at once. And that's why we're in such a difficult situation now. This was then compounded by Brexit and compounded by COVID and all of these things. And so whenever anybody is giving you a simple answer to a really complicated question, they're probably lying, because there are no simple answers. That's what a lot of my videos are about, the fact that we're in a situation where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And also you've then kind of got different groups as well in that, and I think also this is probably where we're starting to see a bit of an age kind of divide effectively going, and I would really say that the Green Party is probably Gen Z and the millennials who are kind of looking for a left-wing populist idea because we should just be able to tax rich people, right? And that will fix the country. And then on the right side, you then got really older people who they just don't like immigration. They don't like brown people. That's a lot of what it is. And obviously that I've done videos about this, that there's a reason for you not to be thrilled about all the immigration that's happened in this country. I completely respect that. But that's never the debate. It's generally a lot of this is about culture, this is about identity and all of this stuff. I'm sure there are cultural problems, there are cultural issues, and there are obviously people's religions that I do think go directly against some of the left's positions, especially when it comes to women. But again, these are things that I'm less interested in, and I'm more interested in the economics of these situations. And so, just to start with the Green Party and Zach Polanski, because I think at the moment he's getting quite an easy ride in the British media. And I think a lot of that is because obviously, because he is from the Green Party, and I suppose they have these more liberal ideas. Zach Polanski himself is gay, which I do also think helps him as well from a point of view, because obviously if he was a straight white man, I think as well in the left space, I don't know how well some of his thoughts would be seen. There's a very odd story going on, and which we kind of seem to have all given up about, but obviously that he used to seem to be a little bit of an actor or a con man, which, and it's something about conning women about their breasts and saying that he could hypnotise them into growing, or it's a really bizarre story. Actually, let me see if I can find it quickly so I'm not completely misspeaking. Filling some airtime. Yeah, so he was a hypnotherapist. Right, so just got up from the Independent. Zach Polanski apologises over claims he can increase women's breast size with his mind. So obviously that is, this happened. This is not some spin story that's been put out there. This is the guy you're dealing with, right? And so I'm not saying that he's a con man, but what I am saying is that he's used to being able to stretch the truth, right? And so one of the things that was in the Green Party manifesto, which obviously was an annual tax of 1% on assets above 10 million or 2% on assets above 1 billion. In theory, this is fine, right? I mean, my thing always about wealth taxes is that I don't really know how you enforce them. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that we don't have international tax agreements with other countries around the world. And so, obviously, if you're very, very rich, you can just go and sail your yacht into Monaco for 6 or 7 months of the year, and then obviously be a resident of Monaco. It's not as simple as saying, well, yes, but their assets are here. It's like, yeah, but if you've got a half decent accountant, there are so many ways to get around these things. Like it's not a pleasant idea. It's not palatable to everybody, but it is a problem that is very hard to solve, and I don't really have an answer to it. But also as well, the problem is that even if you did a 1 or 2% wealth tax on very, very rich people, the amount of money you're raising just isn't that big. I mean, we have a debt interest payment every year of over £100 billion, and a wealth tax looks like it would raise between, 15 and 25 billion a year. And so, and I think, to be honest, a lot of that would lose out in tax revenues from these people going to other countries and just employing other people. And I know Gary Stevenson's talks about, but obviously, they like the society of this country. They don't want to leave, all of this stuff. If you give me 1 billion reasons why to leave, I'll probably leave. But anyway, that's just me. So that's one of their policies. It's not just wealth taxes. Obviously, they want to, get rid of the nuclear deterrent, which I do understand. And obviously that their membership at the moment of the Green Party is surging, and I think that's because he is giving a form of eco-populism, but also the other problem with a lot of these these eco policies are they don't have a lot of economic strategy behind them, and that I think the idea was that it would be some short-term pain for a long-term gain, but then we have these problems that. We paid £1 billion last year to people who operate wind farms to not turn them on because we didn't have anywhere to store the energy and we couldn't get the energy into the grid. And they're having the same problem with these really cool machines up in Scotland, which basically, which are tidal, basically. So a tidal wave comes in, it generates electricity in this machine, and then they pump that back to the mainland. And the problem again they're having is the infrastructure in this country is not enough to get the energy to us, the people. And so Green Party policies, they're great, and green policies are great, but nobody's been particularly honest about how much this is going to cost. And on top of that, obviously, we're currently building the most expensive nuclear energy plant in the world. And the Chinese are helping us with it, but we're very bad at building infrastructure, and we're very bad at just building anything. And so the idea of this being a costless endeavour, I suppose, and it won't make us poorer in the short term to make us richer in the long term, it's just a bit fanciful. And I suppose we have to deal with whether we're comfortable with this or not. And I think a lot of people are not particularly comfortable with how much net zero seems to be costing, basically. And a lot of that is also because that I as I've got older, I do think a lot of socialist ideas, they're fantastic. I love them. However, the problem with socialism is that you do eventually run out of other people's money to spend. And if the state isn't growing, if the country's not growing, if the economy's not booming, then a lot of these things are fiscally impossible, basically. And so while I do like the some of the ideas that Zach Polanski's putting out there, I just don't trust him. There's just something about him that I just do not trust. In the same way, I don't trust Nigel Farage, but I don't know. He just seems to have come out of nowhere, and he's again giving very simple answers to very complicated questions. But I'm also not an economist, but I've not heard an economist say anything good. They just haven't really said anything. And I think a lot of this is obviously because a lot of economists and academics, they come from the left. Interestingly, people that come from the right, the guy that came up with the Laffer curve, I can't remember his first name, but I was listening to him being interviewed on, I think, a slightly right-wing YouTube channel, or right-wing paper. I think it was The Independent. Laffer was talking himself about basically what a great job that he thought that Trump was doing and the economics of actually cutting taxes. Now, this is quite hearing that, right, because I think Donald Trump is pretty awful, and I think his lack of interest in democracy, I think, is something to be quite afraid of. But it was the idea that if you lower taxes, you will basically make more money because people are more incentivized to do things. And if you just stop paying people, if you pay people not to work and you don't incentivize them to work, you end up with problems. And I was watching, I do wonder if there's something in that. Because the UK, we are so stagnant, we're so lacking in really any direction or any kind of manufacturing gold mine that we seem to be going towards. I mean, I was talking to a technician, had a recall on my car, and so I was talking to one of the technicians there, and he used to work for JLR, and he was saying that the technicians there, that they are encouraged to basically effectively slow down. The more productive they are, they get punished, right? So they will go the slow route round the workshop whenever they're building anything. They are encouraged their production to slow down. They have mental health breaks and go and walk around the lake and all of this stuff all the time. And I'm not saying that people should work until they drop, but because there is also so much health and safety around this stuff, that people now, they don't want you to go fast anymore. They want you to get the job done, but safely. And I think the inefficiencies that might have crept into the UK, both economy and manufacturing, I wonder if they're really starting to cause real long-term problems. And I think the benefit system probably reflects this. And obviously there are loads of people that do need to be on benefits, who are ill, who are disabled, who are mentally having a breakdown, and who are just too poor, they don't make enough money. And there's loads of people like that in this country. But also, there's pretty good evidence to see that some benefits pay better than most jobs. And I don't know if we should be particularly comfortable about that as a country. But I suppose you then end up in a chicken or egg situation, right? That you need to increase the wages of the people, and benefits are there to keep people off the poverty line. So what do you do? But I just thought it was interesting that Laffer himself was saying that we need to cut taxes and that we're very, very far past the Laffer curve. And I think that's true. And so I do think it's also quite problematic to kind of keep saying people earning over £100,000 or anything like this, they should be taxed more. I think they're taxed adequately. And this leads me on to what Reform are saying. Now, this is from the Tax Journal, from a woman called Heather Self. Maybe Heather Self-Entitled? I don't know. So basically, the Reform manifesto, when we had the election in 2024, that the idea was to cut 90 billion of tax, which basically the most expensive thing was that they were going to raise the income tax threshold to £20,000. Now that's very interesting, because actually that is as close to a bribe, basically, to the electorate as I can think of. What you'd be better doing is really raising the threshold maybe a couple of thousand, because obviously at the moment it's like 12,000 and something. Be better raising the threshold to maybe 14,000, because continuously holding the current tax brackets at what they are, basically with inflation, is just kind of theft. I mean, it's not actually helping people. It won't help people, because if you're making more money but your tax bracket's not moving, and so you're getting taxed more heavily, then you're not actually making more money. And inflation, so your take-home pay basically is less than what inflation is, and so it's not keeping up with inflation because the government aren't moving the brackets. So it's kind of theft already from people in my head, because you're not allowing their work to really show dividends and progress for themselves. But having an income tax threshold of £20,000 is that's not okay. But what I probably would do is I would have an honest conversation with the electorate and point out that national insurance is a tax. It's always been a tax. It always will be a tax. You are not, with national insurance, yes, you're paying it for 35 years so you have access to the full state pension, but that's like, I mean, it's like saying you pay tax and so you have access to benefits. I mean, it's not, you pay road tax and you have access to roads. Just because I have access to roads doesn't mean the potholes aren't going to blow the bottom of my car to pieces. I actually had 2 wheels destroyed by potholes a couple of years ago. I was very unhappy about that. And obviously wasn't going to sue the local council because that'd be very difficult. But I think if you basically amalgamated the taxes effectively and said that the lower rate of tax was 28% and the higher rate of tax was 40%, I do think that would both add clarity and also it's kind of a bit lower in a lot of ways. But again, you've got to find money to replace all this stuff with, right? So what else did they say? Yeah, you see, so I heard Rory Sutherland, who's a very interesting bloke, who's a marketing man, and he's the most left-wing right-winger I've ever seen, basically. And he described himself as a Georgist. It's basically about land value taxes, all of this stuff. But he said an idea was that to help a bit of the discretion now between the young and the old, that what would be a good idea was to allow your first £100,000 of income to be not taxed, basically. Which I thought was quite interesting, actually, as an idea, because would it allow you in that time to then, save for a house, save for a deposit, any of this stuff, and obviously you do this while living at home, hopefully with your parents. I mean, again, I think some of the things that we don't really talk about is the privilege of young people to be able to live with their parents well into their 20s, because while it's also rubbish, it does mean that you have the ability to use that £2,000 a month that you're earning to actually start saving. And if you don't live at home and you are paying, £1,200 a month in rent, well, that's the money you would be saving. And so it's a very odd thing that we don't really talk about. What else is he talking about? There are a number of other promised taxes, including a cut in fuel duty by 20p. Sure, why not? Cutting corporation tax to 20% and then 15%. And significantly reducing stamp duty. I mean, stamp duty should go, basically. The inheritance tax threshold will be raised to 2 million. I don't think so, mate. With a 20% rate above that, bloody hell. That is insane. And I don't like inheritance tax. I think it encourages people to hide money and to hoard wealth in a very odd way. And I think but because we are taxed so heavily in this country, I think if you manage to amass loads and loads of money, I think a lot of that feels like it was done through hard graft. Now, obviously, some people, if you bought 6 houses in the 1990s, you're now probably 400% up on your investment at least. And so obviously, there are undeserved gains, I suppose, in that capital, but also you can't. This is just the way the system was. This is just how you made money, and I think it's very, very hard to sell to people that yes, no, those children that you've got, yeah, you can't pass this money on to them. And I don't really know. I don't understand why people are so unempathetic about, I suppose, inheritance tax. But again, it's one of those taxes, I suppose, that the people that don't like it, they always think, well, I'll be the exception and I want to leave money to my children. And actually, realistically, by the time you get there, you've spent so much money on your retirement, and just dying's really expensive. It's not cheap, like homes these days. Nursing care, I think, costs, last time I checked, about £70,000 a year. And that will go through your assets fast, basically, if you have a long illness. But I don't think cutting inheritance tax to 20% for anything over £2 million is a good idea. but I don't really know what the answer is, and I do understand why people don't like inheritance tax, because it feels morally quite weird. Although I suppose this is from the guy who wanted to means test pensions, and obviously make you not entitled to the state pension on anything on an estate over 1 million. Well, no, estate over £3 million. So I don't know if I'm the cruel one, I suppose, in that. But again, if you've got £3 million, liquidate £1 million of those assets and live on it. Like, how is that complicated? Why would that be unfair? Anyway, I did this video I did basically on it. Go and watch it. It's basically like, we need to, what was it called? We need to cancel the state pension. We need to get rid of the state pension. And basically there were about 900 comments of just old people going mad about all the payments that they'd made through national insurance or anything like that. And it's kind of like, okay, and obviously the entitlement. I know that you get an entitlement from it, but they were all like, oh, well, we've paid into this pot and it's sat there. It's like, it's not, mate. Your pension's paid from out of other people's taxes. And that's the way it's always worked, and that's what you did. And I think whichever government introduced that, I don't know who did it, but I think they did a generation of real disservice by that. And I think that's become part of old people's social contract that they feel they have with the country. Whereas obviously I think anyone under about 40 feels like the social contract that they had with the country was like broken a very, very long time ago. And my response is always about, I had a £55,000 student loan, which is now at, I think, about £78,000 because of interest. Whoever put interest on those loans is an absolute bastard, but that's the way it goes. But yeah, it's not, inheritance tax is not something that I feel overly comfortable with, but also you understand why you have to do it. I mean, I suppose one of the things that I feel about houses, I do think capital gains tax is potentially something that should be applied to them. And I think if you apply capital gains tax to like people's domiciles, while it's evil and I don't like it, what it would do, it would repress houses rising as fast as they are. Because I think a lot of what's happened in this country and a lot of the problems are down to the fact that we stopped looking at housing as a place to live a really long time ago, and we started looking at it as investments. And I think looking at housing as an investment basically means that if you control the source of most housing, you control most people's lives. And I do think housing probably is an absolute right. And because the government got rid of all the means to build houses, they've been reliant on private landlords for decades, really. Again, wonderful Margaret Thatcher, well done. That I do understand why everyone hates that woman. But it is what it is. But basically, going through I'm just looking at other things on the Reform manifesto. These are not intelligent suggestions. Dan Needle, who's, I don't know if you've heard of him, he's an incredibly intelligent man who I get a lot of my economic, I suppose, information and policy ideas. Not really the ideas, I suppose. His information I find very interesting, and I don't know, I suppose I tried to take that a step further and think, well, what could you do with different situations? I digress. But Dan Needle's a very, very interesting bloke who was a tax lawyer. And he's saying that there's a £34 billion gap in Reform's figures from their manifesto, which I imagine it's probably bigger than that. And I think they put a lot of faith in getting rid of immigrants, basically. I suppose that's the Green Party have. They're getting rid of things that are bad for the environment, and Reform have getting rid of immigrants. And this is their big ideas, that it's tax and it's industrial waste and it's anything like, I don't know. They're and that's the problem with populism, is that it gives complicated questions really simple answers. And that's the only thing I will say for Rachel Reeves and the Labour Party is that I think she's doing a terrible job. But they're in a real bind, and there is no simple answer to these questions. And I would be in a very difficult position if I was her. I would have approached things slightly differently, and I probably would have gambled on. I would have taken basically like I would have lowered taxes for a year, and I would have borrowed the money to do it, and I would have gambled that lowering taxes would have created growth basically in the economy, because people would have gone, oh, I can make loads of money now, let's do it. And then obviously seen where the economy was and work out which parts did really, really well, and very gently then start raising taxes again, and work things out that way. But basically, what she's done with her taxes is that she has paralysed the economy. It's not moving. And that's because obviously this capital gains tax has gone up on everything. Well, people aren't selling assets. They're not really moving forward with businesses. They're just staying as they are. The VAT threshold, I heard them saying that they're going to maybe lower that to £30,000. It's currently £90,000. I mean, good luck doing that. It will create so much more bureaucracy for small businesses, and it's more that you create a problem rather than you raise loads of money from it. You just piss people off. And that's, again, something that's, you do have to be aware of if you're the Chancellor. She also then, taxed people into basically getting fired from jobs, or just they stop hiring them, And I think making it more expensive to hire people while also AI has become such a big thing, I think that was really irresponsible, because I think you slightly start tipping the jobs market towards AI rather than you do allowing people to make money. And currently, people are the only way that you have to get taxable income. So it's a very strange decision. Everything she did basically stopped the economy. Raising stamp duty is absolutely mental. Because again, I do rail a little bit against the older generation, but what I do understand is that stamp duty is the reason a lot of old people don't move out of their houses. They don't downsize. And I've heard people say a lot of it, oh, it's the moral thing of obviously it's their home and all of this. And like, I do kind of understand that, but really, because house prices have gone up so much, then you should be downsizing to a smaller house and using the £300,000 you probably made on it to then get a financial advisor and invest that money, so it's then an additional thing in your retirement. But stamp duty basically means that you're taxed if you sell your house, and you're not taxed if you stay in the house. So why would you sell? Why would you sell? Why would you move? And I think this is again a lot of reason why family homes have become so expensive, because you borderline have to build them for people to get into them. And I hate new builds. So anyway, that's a whole different thing. But populism is definitely something that the electorate needs to be really, really careful of, and that encouraging politics to become just pure populism, because that's basically what Boris Johnson was. He just lied through his teeth constantly. That's what Brexit was. It was populist, just lying. And you just need to be really careful that you don't encourage the political class, that we are too stupid as an electorate to deal with complex problems, that we're too stupid to deal with the truth, and that we only want to hear good things, and we only want to hear, how are you going to fix this? And actually, in reality, things are a lot more complicated, things are a lot worse, and I think the electorate needs to frankly grow up, and they need to understand that things are bad, and you might have to pay for it in your tax to get us out of this situation. And I agree that there's a lot of government waste and all of this stuff, but I don't think there's as much as we think there is, and I don't think there's one easy solution. I suppose that the biggest problem is something like HS2, right? Which has cost tens, and I don't know if it's hundreds of billions now, but it's tens of billions. And you look at that and go, who thought that was a good idea? Why would you do that? So, yes. Anyway, this was the first kind of pilot episode of the Idiot Philosophers podcast. It is just a ramble, and I suppose it's a stream of consciousness while trying to look at some topics. If you liked it, I'm sure comments will say you need to be more succinct and you need to make your points faster, or not pause as much or anything like that. And hopefully over the coming weeks and months I will try and get some guests on and other people to talk about these topics with, and maybe interview. My local council actually is one of the ones which is it's got a 19-year-old who is running a reform council. You probably can all work out where that is now. But I'd love to interview him, because I imagine he is quite fun, or a basket case. But yes, thank you for listening, and please subscribe, and I will see you next time.